Claire Renaud was 7 years old when she first saw her mother save a life. A neighbor woman had been in labor for 2 days, screaming behind closed doors while the men paced outside and the priest prayed. Finally, someone had sent for Marguerite Renaud, the midwife. Claire's mother had pushed through the crowd, her bag of herbs and tools in hand, and Claire, curious, always curious, had followed despite being told to stay home. Inside the birthing room, the laboring woman was gray-faced, exhausted, barely conscious. The baby was stuck, positioned wrong, dying along with its mother. Marguerite had examined her with quick, competent hands. Then she'd done something Claire would never forget. She'd reached inside and turned the baby, her face fierce with concentration, ignoring the woman's screams. Minutes later, a living infant emerged, then the afterbirth. Then Marguerite had packed herbs against the bleeding, given the woman medicine for pain, and saved 2 lives that should have been lost. "How did you know what to do?" Claire had asked afterward, awestruck. "I learned from my mother, who learned from hers. And I practice, I study, I never stop learning." Marguerite had looked at her daughter with serious eyes. "This is holy work, Claire. God gives women the power to bring life into the world. We midwives help them do it safely. If you have the calling, I'll teach you everything I know." Claire had the calling. For the next 15 years, she'd apprenticed with her mother in their small town near Rouen. She'd learned which herbs eased labor pains and which stopped bleeding. She'd learned to read a woman's body, to know when birth would be easy and when it would be dangerous. She'd learned to turn breech babies, to deliver twins, to save women when the church's priests had given up and started administering last rites. She'd also learned that the work was complicated by forces beyond medicine. The church controlled much of women's health care, and not all priests approved of midwives who knew too much. Some said that extensive medical knowledge in women smacked of witchcraft, that God intended childbirth to be painful as punishment for Eve's sin, and easing that pain was working against divine will. Marguerite had navigated these tensions carefully, attending Mass faithfully, consulting with priests when appropriate, but never letting religious dogma kill women she could save. "The Church teaches that all life is sacred," she told Claire. "So when I save a mother and child, I'm doing God's work. If priests disagree, that's between them and God." When Claire was 22, her mother died suddenly of a fever. 1 week she was healthy, the next she was gone, leaving Claire alone with her father, a wheelwright who'd never understood his wife's calling and understood her daughter's even less. "You should marry," he'd said at Marguerite's funeral. "Find a husband, have your own children. This midwife business is dangerous, it attracts attention." Mother did it for 40 years, and died alone, with only her strange daughter for company. Is that what you want? Claire hadn't answered, but she'd known the truth. She had no interest in marriage, in being any man's wife, in the endless pregnancies that killed so many women. She'd seen too much, helped birth too many children, watched too many mothers die to romanticize motherhood. She wanted to be what her mother had been, a midwife, a healer, a woman who controlled her own life and helped others control theirs. But her father had other plans. Within months of Marguerite's death, he'd arranged Claire's engagement to a cooper, a widower named Guillaume who needed a wife to care for his 4 children. "I won't marry him," Claire had said. "You will. You're 22, unmarried, living on my charity. I won't support you forever." "Then I'll support myself." "How? Who'll hire an unmarried woman as a midwife? The church controls licenses. They won't approve you without a husband's backing." He was right, and they both knew it. A woman alone had almost no options, especially one who wanted to practice medicine. Claire had spent a desperate month seeking alternatives. She'd approached other midwives, asking to apprentice or assist, but all were either too poor to hire help or unwilling to risk the church's displeasure by supporting an unmarried woman. Then she'd heard about the Fille de Roi recruitment. New France needed women desperately. The colony was failing because there weren't enough French families to maintain settlements. King Louis XIV was offering free passage, dowries, and guaranteed marriage to women willing to emigrate. It wasn't what Claire wanted, but it was escape. She'd presented herself to the recruitment officers in Le Havre, where they were gathering women for the next ship. "Your age?" the officer asked. 22. "Profession?" "Midwife, trained by my mother for 15 years. The officer's expression changed from bored to interested. "New France needs midwives desperately. Women die in childbirth at alarming rates. We have perhaps 3 trained midwives in the entire colony. Can you prove your training?" Claire produced letters from women she'd delivered, testimony from priests who'd seen her work, even a statement from the local physician acknowledging her competence. "Exceptional," the officer said. "I'll recommend you specifically for Ville-Marie, that's Montreal, the most isolated settlement. They need skilled medical help desperately. With your training, you'll be invaluable." "Will I be required to marry immediately?" "Officially, yes. All filles de roi are sent to marry and have children. But," he lowered his voice, "if you're practicing as a midwife, you'll have some leverage. Midwives are too valuable to waste on constant pregnancy. You may be able to negotiate terms with whatever man you marry." It wasn't freedom, but it was more freedom than marrying Guillaume the cooper and spending the rest of her life raising his children while her medical knowledge withered from disuse. Claire had signed the papers that day, packed her mother's medical bag along with her few possessions, and boarded the Saint-Jean in May 1676. The voyage was hell. 73 days of storms, sickness, cramped quarters. But Claire had made herself useful, treating seasickness, delivering 1 baby at sea, mother and child both survived remarkably, and tending injuries. When they'd finally reached Quebec in mid-July, the other filles du roi had been taken to convents to await marriage, but Claire had been directed to meet with Intendant Duchesneau himself. "Mademoiselle Renaud," he'd said, studying her with sharp eyes, "I understand you're a trained midwife." "Yes, monsieur." "New France has perhaps 500 births per year. We lose 40 to 50 mothers in childbirth annually, nearly 10%. That's catastrophic. We need skilled midwives desperately, particularly in Ville-Marie, which has none." "I'll do whatever I can to help." "Good. I'm assigning you to Ville-Marie with a special arrangement. You'll receive a salary as colonial midwife, plus your fille du roi dowry. You'll be expected to marry eventually, but we won't force an immediate match. Your medical work takes priority." It was more than Claire had hoped for. She'd thanked him, gathered her belongings, and prepared for the journey to Ville-Marie, the small, embattled settlement at the edge of wilderness, surrounded by Iroquois territory, barely surviving despite 34 years of existence. She'd arrived in August 1676, 22 years old, trained as a healer, and completely unprepared for the complicated politics of medicine, religion, and survival in New France's most precarious settlement. But she'd been determined to practice her calling, to save lives as her mother had taught her. She couldn't know that within months, that determination would force her to choose between church authority, colonial survival, and the healing oath she'd sworn to her dying mother, or that her choice would expose secrets that threatened to destroy the fragile peace holding New France together. Ville-Marie in 1676 was nothing like Paris or even Quebec. It was a rough settlement of perhaps 200 people, most living within or very close to a wooden palisade for protection against Iroquois raids. The buildings were crude, log structures with bark roofs, a stone church that was the settlement's pride, a small hospital run by the Hôtel Dieu nuns, a governor's residence that was barely more elaborate than the other houses. Claire was met by Sister Marguerite Bourgeois, the remarkable woman who'd founded the Congregation de Notre Dame and who effectively ran much of Ville-Marie's social services. "You're the midwife," Sister Marguerite said, without preamble. "Thank God. We've lost 3 mothers this summer alone. Do you have proper training, or are you one of those women who learned from gossip and guesswork?" "I was trained by my mother, who was trained by hers. 15 years of apprenticeship. I can turn breech babies, handle twins, stop hemorrhaging, and I know dozens of herbal remedies." Sister Marguerite studied her with eyes that missed nothing. Good. But you'll need to work with the Hôtel Dieu sisters. They oversee all medical care in the settlement. And you'll need to consult with Father Perrault about any questionable cases. Questionable how? Any situation involving indigenous women, any birth that might involve complications. The Church has authority over all spiritual matters, which includes decisions about who receives care. Claire felt a chill. The Church decides who I'm allowed to help? The Church decides what's appropriate within a Catholic settlement, yes, but we'll discuss that later. First, let me show you your accommodations. Claire was given a small room attached to the Hôtel Dieu hospital, barely more than a closet, but private, which was luxury in the crowded settlement. She had a narrow bed, a table for her medicines, a crucifix on the wall, and a window overlooking the settlement's main street. You'll take meals with the sisters, Sister Marguerite explained, and you'll be expected to attend Mass daily. The governor, François-Marie Perrault, wants all settlers to set proper Christian examples, especially anyone in a position of authority. Over the following days, Claire learned the settlement's rhythms. Morning Mass, followed by work, endless work. Women tending gardens, preserving food, making clothes, caring for children. Men building, hunting, standing guard against potential attacks, clearing land for farming. Ville-Marie was perpetually on edge. The Iroquois Confederacy, particularly the Mohawk, conducted frequent raids, killing settlers, burning fields, taking captives. A fragile peace had held for a few years, but everyone knew it could shatter at any moment. The settlement's survival depended on maintaining alliances with friendly indigenous peoples, particularly the Algonquin and some Huron groups, while managing constant threat from the Iroquois. Claire's first delivery came within a week. Marie Chartier, a farmer's wife, went into labor at dawn. Claire arrived to find the woman in serious trouble. The baby was breech, and Marie had been laboring for 12 hours already, exhausted and frightened. "Can you save her?" Marie's husband asked desperately. "I'll try." Claire worked for 4 hours, using every technique her mother had taught her. She administered herbs to ease pain and strengthen contractions. She massaged Marie's belly, trying to encourage the baby to turn. Finally, when it was clear the baby wouldn't turn naturally, she reached in and did what her mother had done, turned the baby manually, ignoring Marie's screams. The baby emerged blue and still. Claire cleared its mouth, rubbed its chest vigorously, and breathed into its tiny lungs the way she'd learned. After terrifying seconds, the baby gasped and began crying. Marie wept with relief. Claire delivered the afterbirth, packed herbs against the bleeding, and only then allowed herself to feel the exhaustion and triumph. "You saved them both," the husband said, his voice breaking. "Thank you, thank you." Word spread quickly through the settlement. The new midwife knew what she was doing. Within days, Claire had more requests for care than she could handle. Not just deliveries, but treating illnesses, setting broken bones, providing medicines for everything from colic to fever. She was useful, valued, busy. It felt good after months of uncertainty. But complications arose in September. A young woman named Angélique Rousseau came to Claire's room late one evening, clearly pregnant and clearly terrified. "Please, you have to help me," she whispered. "I'm 4 months gone, and I can't have this baby." "Why not?" "Because my husband has been gone for 9 months, trading in the Western Territories. Everyone will know the baby isn't his. I'll be shamed, maybe even prosecuted for adultery." Claire felt sympathy, but also wariness. "Who is the father?" Angélique looked away. "I can't say. Please, I just need you to help me not be pregnant anymore." She was asking for an abortion. Claire's hands went cold. "I can't do that," she said quietly. "It's illegal, immoral, and dangerous. You could die." "Then what am I supposed to do?" Wait for my husband to return and learn I've been unfaithful? I'll be ruined. You could claim the baby came early. Many babies do. At 9 months premature, no one would believe it. They talked for an hour. Claire offered alternatives: adoption, claiming the baby was her husband's, with careful timing of announcement, even leaving Ville-Marie to have the baby elsewhere. But Angelique rejected everything, growing more desperate. Finally, Claire said, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you end the pregnancy. My calling is to save lives, not end them. If you're determined to do this, you'll have to find someone else. But please, don't try it yourself. I've seen women die from botched attempts." Angelique left angry. 3 days later, she was found bleeding heavily, having attempted to end the pregnancy herself using a sharpened stick. The Hôtel Dieu sisters called Claire immediately. Claire worked frantically to save Angelique's life, packing the wounds, giving herbs to stop the bleeding, fighting infection. The baby was lost, and Angelique nearly died too. She survived, but she'd never have children again. Father Perrault, the priest, came to Claire afterward. "Did you provide Angelique with abortifacient herbs or advice?" "No, Father. She asked, and I refused." "Yet she attempted it anyway." "Yes, I warned her of the dangers, but she was desperate." Father Perrault studied Claire with cold eyes. "You're a midwife. You have knowledge of such things. Some might say you're culpable simply by possessing that knowledge. I possess knowledge to save lives, not end them. See that you remember that. The Church will be watching your practice carefully, Mademoiselle Renaud. Medicine is acceptable. Anything that edges towards witchcraft or defiance of God's will is not." After he left, Claire sat in her small room, shaking. She'd done the right thing, refused to perform an illegal and dangerous procedure, but Angelique had nearly died anyway, and now Claire was under suspicion for simply knowing too much. It was exactly what her mother had warned about: the danger of being a competent woman in a world controlled by men who feared competence. But Claire had no intention of becoming less competent to make them comfortable. She would practice medicine, save lives, and navigate the Church's restrictions as carefully as possible. What she didn't yet understand was how impossible that navigation would become, or how soon she'd be forced to choose between Church authority and her healing oath. That test would come in November, when a pregnant Mohawk woman would arrive at her door in the middle of the night, desperate for help. And Claire would have to decide: obey the Church's prohibition against aiding savages, or honor her mother's teaching that all life was sacred. The choice would change everything. The knock came at midnight, soft but insistent. Claire woke from exhausted sleep, disoriented. She delivered twins that afternoon, both healthy, mother surviving, and had collapsed into bed barely an hour ago. The knock came again. Claire pulled a shawl over her nightdress and opened the door cautiously. The settlement could be dangerous at night: occasional raids, drunken soldiers, wild animals. A woman stood in the darkness, indigenous, young, very pregnant, and clearly in labor. Beside her was an older Frenchwoman Claire recognized, Jeanne Mance, one of Ville-Marie's founders and administrator of the Hôtel Dieu hospital. "Claire," Madame Mance said quietly, "this is Conwa-Titsianeni. She's Mohawk and she needs help." Claire's mind raced. Mohawk, the most hostile of the Iroquois nations, the people who'd killed dozens of settlers, who were technically at peace but could resume warfare at any moment. "Madame Mance, you know the Church's position. I know what Father Perrault says. I also know that this woman is human, pregnant, and in trouble. And I know your mother's oath, which you told me about, to save lives regardless of station or circumstance." The woman, Conwa-Titsianeni, groaned softly, clutching her swollen belly. Even in the darkness, Claire could see something was wrong. Her face was gray, her breathing labored, her body bent in a way that suggested serious complications. "How far along is she?" Claire asked. 8 months, maybe 9. The baby should have come by now, but labor isn't progressing." "And the father?" She won't say, but she came to me because she knows I've treated Indigenous people before. She's desperate, Claire. Whatever's wrong, she thinks she'll die without help." Claire looked at the woman, saw the fear in her eyes, the universal fear of mother worried for her child's life. In that moment, Konwatitsianeni wasn't Mohawk or enemy or political complication. She was just a woman in labor, needing help. "Bring her inside, quickly, before anyone sees." They helped Konwatitsianeni into Claire's small room. Claire examined her by candlelight, and her heart sank. The baby was positioned wrong, transverse, lying sideways across the womb. It couldn't be born in that position. Without intervention, both mother and child would die. "I need to turn the baby," Claire said to Madame Mons. "It's dangerous, painful, but it's the only chance." Madame Mons translated. She spoke some Mohawk from years of interaction. Konwatitsianeni nodded, her jaw tight. For the next 3 hours, Claire worked. She administered herbs to ease pain and strengthen contractions. She massaged the belly, trying to encourage the baby to turn naturally. When that failed, she did the most dangerous thing. She reached inside and turned the baby manually. Konwatitsianeni bit down on a leather strap to muffle her screams. Madame Mons held her hands, murmured encouragement, wiped sweat from her face. Finally, the baby turned. Contractions resumed properly. At dawn, a living infant emerged, a girl, small but healthy, with a furious cry. Konwatitsianeni wept, holding her daughter, speaking rapid Mohawk that Claire couldn't understand, but recognized as gratitude. "Thank you," Madame Mons translated. "She says you saved both their lives. She says she's in your debt. Tell her she owes me nothing. I'm a midwife. This is what I do." As morning light filled the room, Claire's exhaustion gave way to anxiety. Konwatitsianeni and her newborn couldn't stay hidden. People would have heard the screams, would have seen Madame Mons coming and going. "She needs to leave before the settlement wakes fully," Claire said. "If Father Perrault discovers—" "Too late," said a cold voice from the doorway. Father Perrault stood there, his face rigid with fury. Behind him were 2 militia soldiers. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "A Mohawk woman in the settlement being treated by our midwife?" "She was dying," Claire said, standing to face him. "She and her child both. I'm a healer. I couldn't turn them away." "You could and you should have. Mademoiselle Renaud, you violated direct church orders. We do not provide medical care to savages, especially not Mohawk. They're our enemies." "She's a woman in labor. That makes her my patient, not my enemy." "Your patient?" Father Perrault's voice rose. "You have no authority to make such decisions. The church teaches that all souls are precious, or have you forgotten that, Father? This woman is baptized. She converted years ago. She's as much a Catholic as any of us." This seemed to surprise Father Perrault. "She's baptized?" Konwatitsianeni spoke, and Madame Mons translated. "Baptized at 8 years old by Jesuit missionaries, Christian name Marie Therese. She's lived with her people, but kept her faith." The presence of baptism complicated things. The church couldn't easily deny care to a Catholic, even a Mohawk one. But Father Perrault rallied. "Regardless, bringing her into the settlement without permission, treating her in secret, this shows terrible judgment. Mademoiselle Renaud, you're suspended from practicing medicine until the church council can review your case." "Suspended? Father, there are pregnant women who need care." "The Hôtel Dieu sisters will manage. You will confine yourself to your room and await judgment." He left, taking the soldiers with him. Madame Mons helped Konwatitsianeni and her baby leave quickly through a back way, promising to shelter them until they could safely return to Mohawk territory. Claire was left alone in her room, the reality of what she'd done settling over her like frost. She'd saved 2 lives. She'd also defied church authority, possibly destroyed her position as colonial midwife, and created a diplomatic incident that could have repercussions far beyond her understanding. But as she cleaned the blood from her hands and put away her medicines, Claire felt no regret. Her mother had taught her that life was sacred, all life. If the church disagreed, that was between them and God. Claire had honored her calling. Whatever came next, she'd face it knowing she'd done what was right, even if right had a price she hadn't anticipated paying. Claire had been born in 1654 in a small town called Pont-Audemer, halfway between Rouen and Le Havre. Her father, Thomas Renaud, made wheels for carts and wagons, skilled work that provided steady if modest income. Her mother, Marguerite, was the town's midwife. Claire's earliest memories were her mother's work. Women would arrive at her door at odd hours, frightened and in pain, and Marguerite would gather her bag and go to them. Sometimes she'd return in hours, sometimes days. Always she'd be exhausted but satisfied when births went well, drawn and sad when they didn't. "Why do you do it if it makes you so tired?" young Claire had asked. "Because bringing life into the world is sacred work. God made women to birth children. I help them do it safely. That's a gift, Claire, a calling." By age 7, Claire was accompanying her mother on calls. At first, she just watched, the way Marguerite examined women, the herbs she administered, the gentle confidence she projected even in difficult circumstances. A midwife must be calm, Marguerite taught, even when you're terrified, even when things are going wrong. Women in labor need to trust you. Fear makes labor harder. By 10, Claire was assisting, fetching water, holding hands, preparing medicines. By 12, she was learning the theoretical knowledge, which herbs did what, how to recognize dangerous presentations, when to call a physician, rare, versus when to handle things herself, almost always. Her father disapproved. "It's not proper for a girl to see such things. She should be learning needlework, household management." "She'll learn those too," Marguerite replied. "But she has the gift, Thomas. I can see it. She'll be a better midwife than I am." And Claire did have the gift. She could remain calm during crises. She had gentle, steady hands. She learned quickly and remembered everything. Most importantly, she cared deeply about the women she helped, saw them as people, not just problems to solve. She also developed her mother's pragmatism about the church. The local priest, Father Augustine, sometimes interfered with medical care, insisting that difficult births were God's will, that women should suffer as penance for Eve's sin, that easing pain was working against divine judgment. Marguerite had navigated this carefully. She'd attend Mass faithfully, consult Father Augustine on spiritual matters, and then do whatever medicine required, regardless of his opinions. "The Church serves God," she'd told Claire, "but so do we in our own way. When I save a mother and child, I'm honoring the life God created. If priests think suffering is holy, let them suffer. I'll spare women that holiness when I can." It was a delicate balance, and not everyone approved. Some townspeople whispered that Marguerite knew too much, that her success rate was suspiciously high, that perhaps she trafficked with dark forces. "Ignore them," Marguerite had advised. "Competent women always make incompetent people uncomfortable. As long as we have church approval and don't make enemies of powerful men, we can practice our calling." Claire had absorbed these lessons. She'd learned medicine and politics in equal measure. But she'd also learned something her mother hadn't taught explicitly, that she had no interest in marriage or motherhood. She'd seen too many women destroyed by endless pregnancies, too many dying in childbirth, too many left weak and broken by bearing child after child, too many losing their identities to become merely vessels for men's children. By 15, when other girls were courting and dreaming of husbands, Claire was studying anatomy texts, borrowed from the local surgeon, experimenting with herbal mixtures, and practicing techniques on wooden dolls. You should want marriage, her father would say, children, a household. I want to be a midwife, like mother. Your mother is married, has children, you. And she's always said one child was enough, that more would have killed her or ended her practice. Thomas had no answer to that. Marguerite had indeed stopped after Claire, using her medical knowledge to prevent further pregnancies, knowledge she'd shared with other women who asked, though never publicly. At 17, Claire began taking on births herself, with her mother present, but increasingly as observer rather than lead. She was good, very good. Her success rate was even better than Marguerite's. But increased competence meant increased visibility, which meant increased scrutiny. A new priest arrived in Pont-Audemer when Claire was 19, Father Bernard, young and zealous, fresh from seminary and convinced that the church needed to reassert control over women's lives. He'd started making pronouncements. Midwives should consult priests before administering certain herbs. Women should accept childbirth pain as divine will. Anyone demonstrating unusual knowledge should be examined for heretical tendencies. Marguerite had seen the danger immediately. He's going to cause trouble. We need to be very careful. They'd been careful, but careful wasn't enough when Father Bernard decided to make an example. A woman named Lisette had come to them, 6 months pregnant and bleeding. Marguerite and Claire had worked frantically to save her, using every technique they knew. They'd managed to stop the bleeding and preserve the pregnancy, though Lisette would need to rest for the remaining months. Father Bernard had visited afterward, questioning their methods. What herbs did you use? Shepherd's purse for bleeding, raspberry leaf to tone the womb. And how do you know these herbs work? Who taught you such specific knowledge? My mother, who learned from her mother. Knowledge passed down through women without church oversight or male authority. That sounds suspiciously like the cunning folk practices we're supposed to suppress. The accusation had hung in the air, dangerous and unmistakable. Cunning folk, practitioners of folk magic, were sometimes prosecuted as witches. Marguerite had intervened. Father Bernard, my family has practiced midwifery for 3 generations with full church approval. We use herbs anyone can find in a garden, applied with techniques taught in medical texts. There's nothing heretical here, just competent healthcare. Healthcare that succeeds suspiciously often. Some might wonder if you've made bargains for such success. The only bargain I've made is with hard work and careful study. If that's suspicious, then medicine itself is suspicious. The confrontation ended without immediate consequences, but the threat was clear. Father Bernard was watching them, looking for any excuse to move against their practice. A month later, Marguerite died of fever. It came suddenly. One day she was healthy, 3 days later she was dead. Some townspeople whispered it was divine judgment. Others suggested poison. Claire suspected it was simply the random cruelty of disease. Without her mother's protection and reputation, Claire found herself vulnerable. Father Bernard made clear that he wouldn't approve her practice without male oversight, either a husband or a physician supervisor. Her father had immediately begun arranging the marriage to Guillaume, the widowed cooper. Claire had felt trapped, seeing her future narrow to domestic drudgery and wasted medical knowledge. The Fille de Roy recruitment had been salvation, imperfect salvation, crossing an ocean, marrying eventually, working under church authority in New France, but salvation nonetheless. Now, confined to her room in Ville-Marie, facing church discipline for saving a Mohawk woman's life, Claire wondered if she'd simply traded one trap for another. But at least in New France, she'd saved lives. She'd practiced her calling. She'd honored her mother's memory. Whatever punishment came, that counted for something. Claire spent 3 days confined to her room, waiting for the church council's judgment. The Hôtel Dieu sisters brought her meals but wouldn't speak to her beyond basic courtesies. She was being shunned, made invisible. On the 4th day, she was summoned to the church. The council consisted of Father Perret, Governor François-Marie Perret, the priest's cousin, which explained much about their shared authority, Sister Bourgeois, and surprisingly, Madame Mance. Claire stood before them, hands folded, trying to project calm she didn't feel. Father Perrot spoke first. Mademoiselle Renaud, you're here to answer for serious violations. You provided medical care to a Mohawk woman without authorization. You brought her into the settlement in secret. You defied direct church instruction about whom you may treat. How do you respond? I respond that I saved 2 lives, a mother and child who would have died without intervention. As a midwife, that's my calling. Your calling is subject to church authority and colonial security. The Mohawk are our enemies. The woman in question is Catholic, baptized, confirmed, practicing. By church law, she's entitled to care. Her baptism doesn't negate her tribal allegiance, Governor Perrot countered. Mohawk Christians are still Mohawk, still potentially dangerous. Then why do we send missionaries to convert them if we won't honor that conversion when it's inconvenient? The question hung in the air. Sister Bourgeois leaned forward. That's actually an excellent point. We can't claim conversion is sacred and then deny converted people's access to church services, including medical care. It undermines our entire missionary enterprise. This isn't about theology, Father Perrot said impatiently. It's about judgment. Mademoiselle Renaud showed terrible judgment, bringing an enemy into our settlement. I showed medical judgment, Claire corrected. A woman was dying. I had the skills to save her. Refusing would have violated my oath as a healer. What oath? You're not a physician. The oath I swore to my mother, who trained me, to save lives regardless of station or circumstance. That's the foundation of medical practice, Father. You can disagree with it, but you can't ask me to violate it without asking me to stop being a midwife. Governor Perrot sighed. This creates a diplomatic problem. If word reaches the Mohawk that we treated one of their women well, it might improve relations. But if word spreads that we allow enemy women into the settlement freely, it creates security risks. And if other settlers think we prioritize savages over French lives, I would treat any woman in need, French, Mohawk, Algonquin, English. Life doesn't stop being sacred based on tribal allegiance. That's a dangerously universal position, Father Perrot said. The church teaches charity, yes, but also discernment. We can't help everyone. Can't or won't? The boldness of the question surprised even Claire, but she was tired of pretending, tired of navigating politics when lives were at stake. Sister Bourgeois smiled slightly. She has courage, I'll give her that. Father Perrot, what exactly are you proposing? We can't execute or imprison her for saving lives. We need her. She's the only trained midwife in Ville-Marie. Are you suggesting we dispense with medical care to make a political point? I'm suggesting discipline, a clear message that church authority matters. What kind of discipline? Madame Mance asked. Probation. Mademoiselle Renaud will continue practicing, but under direct supervision. She'll report all patients to me before treating them. Any questionable cases, indigenous women, complicated situations must receive church approval first. Any violation results in immediate expulsion from the colony. It was harsh, but not catastrophic. Claire could work with supervision, could navigate approval processes. But something made her push back. And what happens when a woman is dying and there's no time to seek approval? What happens when waiting for your permission means death? Then you make the best judgment you can and accept consequences. Meaning you'll punish me for saving lives if I don't follow proper procedure first. Meaning medicine, like everything else, operates within social structures. You don't get to ignore those structures just because you think you know better. Claire wanted to argue more, but Madame Mance caught her eye and shook her head slightly. Accept this. Fight later. I understand. Probation and supervision. I'll report patients as required. Good, Father Perrot said. But understand, Mademoiselle Renaud, you're being watched. Any further defiance will not be tolerated. After the council dismissed her, Madame Mance pulled Claire aside. "You need to be smarter about this," she said quietly. "Father Parrot wants to make an example of you. Don't give him the ammunition. I can't let women die because of bureaucracy. You can't save anyone if you're expelled from the colony. Pick your battles. Learn to work within the system while quietly subverting it when necessary. Is that what you do?" Madame Mance smiled. "I've been managing church men for 34 years. Trust me, open defiance rarely works. Strategic compliance while doing what needs doing works much better." It was good advice. Claire tried to take it. She returned to her practice under supervision. For several weeks, she reported every patient, sought approval for anything remotely questionable, and demonstrated perfect compliance. Father Parrot seemed satisfied. Her supervision lightened. Trust, slowly, tentatively, began to rebuild. Then, in December, everything collapsed. A young Algonquin woman, Wapinu, about 16, came to Claire in desperate condition. She'd been raped by a French soldier, had hidden the pregnancy out of shame, and was now miscarrying at 6 months. The bleeding was catastrophic. Claire worked frantically to save her, but Wapinu died within hours, the baby dying with her. Father Perrault arrived as Claire was preparing the body. "You treated her without approval," he said. "She was dying. There wasn't time." "There's always time to follow procedure. You promised to report all patients." "She came to me in crisis. Waiting would have achieved the same result. She died anyway. But I had to try." "You had to try, or you wanted to defy me?" "This isn't about you." Claire's exhaustion and grief boiled over. "This is about a 16-year-old girl who was raped and died because she was too afraid to seek help earlier. This is about a system that cares more about procedure than lives. This is about a midwife who thinks her judgment supersedes church authority. Mademoiselle Renaud, you're expelled from Ville-Marie. You have 1 week to arrange transportation back to Quebec. From there, you'll be returned to France at your own expense." Claire stared at him, the reality settling over her. Expelled, sent home. Her medical practice, her calling, her entire purpose ended because she'd tried to save a dying girl. "Father, please." "The decision is final. You've proven you can't work within proper structures. New France has no place for your kind of defiance." After he left, Claire collapsed onto a chair, numb with shock. Everything she'd worked for, crossed an ocean for, nearly died for during that hellish voyage, gone, because she'd valued lives over procedure. Madame Mance found her an hour later, still sitting in shock. "I heard," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Claire. I tried to argue for you, but Father Perrault was immovable." "What do I do? I have no money for passage to France, and even if I get there, I have nothing, no family, no prospects, no way to practice medicine." "You have options, but they're not conventional ones." "What options?" Madame Mance glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "There's a mission station 20 miles north, run by Jesuits. They work with converted Algonquin and Huron peoples. They need medical help desperately. They've been sending to Montreal for assistance. If you went there, you'd be outside Father Perrault's authority, but still technically within New France." "Would they take me, a woman expelled by the church?" "The Jesuits are complicated. Some are zealots like Father Perrault. Others are pragmatists who value results over procedure. Father Claude, who runs this particular mission, is the pragmatic type. He might welcome a trained midwife, especially one willing to work with indigenous peoples." It was a lifeline, precarious but real. "How do I get there?" "I'll arrange it. But Claire, if you do this, you're committing to something difficult. living with indigenous peoples, learning their ways, operating completely outside French settlement society. You might never be allowed back into Ville-Marie or Quebec. Is that a price you're willing to pay? Claire thought about her mother's oath, about the women she could help, about the calling that had defined her entire life. "Yes," she said, "I'll pay that price. Because being a midwife wasn't just what she did, it was who she was. And she'd rather practice her calling among people who valued it than rot in France waiting for permission from men who feared competent women." The next week, Claire packed her medical bag, her few possessions, and prepared to disappear into the wilderness. She was leaving behind civilization, church approval, colonial protection, but she was keeping her calling, and that, Claire Renaud decided, was worth any price. Father Claude Martin received Claire with more warmth than she'd expected from a Jesuit missionary. A trained midwife who's willing to work with indigenous peoples? His weathered face, he was perhaps 50, broke into a genuine smile. "Mademoiselle Renaud, you're an answer to prayers I'd given up hope for." The mission station, called Sainte Anne de Bellevue, was smaller than Ville-Marie, perhaps 30 French inhabitants, mostly Jesuits and a few lay workers, plus a fluctuating population of converted Algonquin and Huron families. The buildings were a mix of French construction and indigenous longhouses, creating an architectural statement about cultural blending. "We try to meet people halfway," Father Claude explained as he showed Claire around. "We teach Christian faith, yes, but we also learn indigenous languages, adopt practical aspects of their lifestyle, and try to understand their worldview. Some in the church think we're too accommodating, but I believe you can't convert people whose culture you despise." It was refreshingly different from Father Perot's rigid orthodoxy. Claire was given a small cabin and immediately put to work. The mission's medical needs were overwhelming: chronic illnesses, injuries from hunting and accidents, and most critically, numerous pregnant women with no proper care. "We lose too many mothers," Father Claude admitted. "The indigenous peoples have their own birth practices, which work well for uncomplicated deliveries, but when there are problems, breech births, hemorrhaging, obstructed labor, their traditional methods sometimes aren't enough, and we have no trained midwife. Women have died when French intervention might have saved them." Within days, Claire was busy. Her first patient was a Huron woman named Sundakwa, 7 months pregnant with her 4th child and experiencing troubling symptoms. Claire examined her and recognized preeclampsia, dangerously high blood pressure that could lead to seizures and death. She'd seen it several times with her mother. "She needs complete rest, reduced salt, and specific herbs to lower her blood pressure," Claire explained to Father Claude. "Without treatment, she could die before or during delivery." "Can you treat her?" "I can try, but I'll need her family's cooperation. They have to understand the restrictions." Working through Father Claude's translation, Claire explained the situation to Sundakwa and her husband, Ottawenrat. They listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and agreed to follow Claire's instructions. Over the following weeks, Claire monitored Sundakwa closely. The treatment worked. Blood pressure decreased, symptoms improved. When labor came at 8 months, Claire was there, guiding the delivery. The baby was small but healthy. Sundakwa recovered well. Word spread quickly through both the mission and the surrounding indigenous communities. The French healing woman knew powerful medicine. More patients came, not just pregnant women, but people with injuries, illnesses, chronic conditions. Claire found herself practicing medicine more broadly than just midwifery, learning indigenous healing practices while sharing her own knowledge. Sundakwa became a friend and teacher, showing Claire which local plants had medicinal properties, explaining indigenous theories of health and balance. French medicine sees the body as a machine that breaks, Sandakwa observed. Our medicine sees the body as part of larger patterns: spirit, family, nature. Both have wisdom. Can they be combined? You're already combining them. When you treat my blood pressure with herbs and rest, you use French understanding of the body and our understanding of plant medicine. That's good medicine. Through winter, Claire settled into mission life. It was different from anything she'd known. The cultural mixing, the constant negotiation between French and indigenous ways, the sense of existing in a space between worlds. Father Claude was an ideal employer, grateful for Claire's skills, supportive of her methods, willing to defend her when occasional visitors from Ville-Marie questioned her presence. Mademoiselle Renaud has saved a dozen lives since arriving, he told one skeptical priest who visited in February. That seems more important than procedural purity. But Claire also encountered resistance. Some indigenous families, particularly those less assimilated, were suspicious of French medicine. Some French visitors were horrified that she was treating savages as equals. And hovering over everything was the threat that Father Perot might extend his authority to the mission, forcing Claire to leave even this refuge. The threat materialized in March 1677 when Governor Perot visited the mission on an inspection tour. He was accompanied by Father Perot, who looked around the mixed settlement with obvious disapproval. Father Claude, I'm disturbed by reports of excessive cultural accommodation here. This mission is supposed to civilize savages, not adopt their practices. We're supposed to save souls, Father Claude replied mildly. That requires understanding the people we're trying to reach. And housing expelled colonists? Mademoiselle Renaud, you were ordered to return to Quebec. Claire stepped forward. I'm not in Ville-Marie, Governor. I'm in Father Claude's mission, under his authority. My expulsion was from your settlement, not from New France entirely. A technicality. A legal distinction, Father Claude interrupted. Mademoiselle Renaud works for me with my approval, treating people who desperately need her skills. Unless you're prepared to remove her by force, which would be difficult to justify given her value, I suggest you let her continue her work. Governor Perot looked furious, but Father Claude was right about the difficulty. Forcibly removing a useful medical practitioner from a struggling mission would look petty and vindictive. Fine, Governor Perot said, but understand, she's your responsibility now, Father Claude. Any problems she causes reflect on you. After they left, Father Claude turned to Claire with a wry smile. Well, you're officially my problem now. Try not to cause too many incidents. I'll do my best. But even as she said it, Claire knew incidents were inevitable, because saving lives sometimes meant breaking rules. And Claire had never been good at letting rules kill people. In May 1677, a young woman named Kateri arrived at the mission, Mohawk, about 18, very pregnant and terrified. She was accompanied by an older Mohawk woman named Tekakwithwetha, who spoke some French. My granddaughter needs help. Her pregnancy is dangerous. Our healers say both she and the baby will die without French medicine. Claire examined Kateri and understood immediately why indigenous medicine had failed. The girl had what appeared to be a tumor in her womb alongside the pregnancy, a rare and dangerous condition. The baby was growing in a limited space, compressed by the abnormal growth. Without surgery, impossible in these conditions, both mother and child would almost certainly die. But Claire might be able to manage the delivery if it happened now, at 8 months, before the situation became completely impossible. I can try to deliver the baby early, Claire explained through translation. It's very risky. The baby might not survive being born premature. And your granddaughter, I can't remove the tumor. Best case, she survives this pregnancy, but can never have more children. Worst case, they both die despite my help. Tekakwitha translated. Kateri listened, then spoke. She says she understands the risks, but she's Mohawk, not Huron or Algonquin. If people learn she's here, we'll keep it secret, Father Claude said, having been drawn by the commotion. But Mademoiselle Renaud, you understand the complications. If Governor Perrot learns you're treating Mohawk again, he won't learn. Not from me. They set up a private space in Claire's cabin. For 2 days, Claire administered herbs to induce early labor. Kateri was stoic, barely making sound even during intense contractions. The delivery was nightmarish. The baby was compressed, tangled with the tumor, difficult to extract. Claire worked for hours, guided more by intuition and desperation than certain knowledge. Finally, the baby emerged, a boy, small and blue, not breathing. Claire cleared his mouth, rubbed his chest, breathed into his lungs. For agonizing seconds, nothing. Then a gasp, a weak cry. He's alive, Claire said, relief washing over her. But Kateri was hemorrhaging severely. Claire packed herbs, applied pressure, used every technique she knew. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop completely. She needs rest, medication, and careful monitoring, Claire told Tekakwitha. The baby needs to be kept warm, fed frequently. Both are fragile. How long before they can travel? Weeks, a month at least. Tekakwitha's face showed concern. That's a long time to keep them hidden. It was, but there was no choice. For 3 weeks, Kateri and her son stayed in Claire's cabin. Claire monitored them constantly, adjusting treatments, fighting infection, coaxing the premature baby to feed and grow. The mission community was told that Claire was treating a sick relative from Quebec. Father Claude made sure to reinforce the story, deflecting questions. Slowly, both mother and baby improved. Kateri's bleeding stopped. The baby gained weight, began crying lustily, showed signs of thriving despite his difficult start. But in the 4th week, disaster struck. A group of French traders arrived at the mission, including one of Governor Perrot's men. They were seeking information about recent Mohawk movements. There had been raids near outlying settlements, and tension was rising. The trader, a rough man named Lebrun, noticed unusual activity around Claire's cabin. "Who's the woman keeping inside?" he asked Father Claude suspiciously. "A patient of Mademoiselle Renaud's, a private matter." "Private? Nothing's private during a potential war. I need to see who's there." "That's inappropriate. Medical patients deserve privacy." But Lebrun pushed past, several other traders following. They burst into Claire's cabin before she could stop them. Kateri sat in the corner, nursing her baby. Her Mohawk clothing and features were unmistakable. "Mohawk!" Lebrun shouted. "There's a Mohawk woman here. Father Claude, you're harboring enemies." "She's a patient," Claire said, stepping between them. "A mother who nearly died in childbirth. She's under my medical protection." "Medical protection? She's a spy or a scout for raiders." "She's a teenage mother with a newborn. Use your eyes." But reason didn't matter. Lebrun and his men dragged Kateri and her baby from the cabin, despite Claire's protests. They bound Kateri's hands, treated her roughly, ignored her baby's crying. "Take them to Ville-Marie," Lebrun ordered. "Let Governor Perrot decide what to do with them." Father Claude tried to intervene. "This is my mission. You have no authority." "But we have the authority of colonial defense. In times of potential war, any indigenous person can be detained for questioning." They left, taking Kateri and her baby with them. Claire watched helplessly, fury and fear warring in her chest. "We have to stop this," she told Father Claude. "That girl isn't a spy, she's a patient. They'll kill her or imprison her, and the baby." "I know, but we need to be strategic. If we simply storm into Ville-Marie demanding her release, we'll be arrested too. We need allies, legal arguments, leverage. While you're building legal arguments, Kateri could die, or her baby could. And if we act rashly, we'll achieve nothing except martyring ourselves. Claire, I understand your urgency, but we're not going to help anyone by being reckless." It was the hardest thing Claire had ever done, waiting, planning, building arguments when every instinct screamed to act immediately. But Father Claude was right. Recklessness wouldn't save Kateri. What they needed was strategy. And if strategy failed, Claire was prepared to act recklessly anyway. Because she'd saved that girl's life, she'd delivered that baby safely. She'd be damned if she'd let colonial politics destroy them now. Kateri and her baby were imprisoned in Ville-Marie's small jail, a single room attached to the guard post. Governor Perrot had ordered them held while he decided whether they posed a security threat. Claire and Father Claude traveled to Ville-Marie immediately, arriving to find the settlement in an uproar. Rumors had spread. Mohawk spies were infiltrating missions. Indigenous women were being used to gather intelligence. The peace was about to collapse into renewed warfare. "It's hysteria," Father Claude said grimly, "and hysteria makes people do terrible things." They met first with Madame Moss, who'd been advocating for Kateri's release. Governor Perrot is using this to make a broader point. He's been criticized for being too lenient with Indigenous peoples. Now he wants to show strength. That girl is a convenient target. "She's an innocent mother with a newborn. Anyone with eyes can see she's not a spy." But truth doesn't matter when politics are in play. What matters is perception, fear, and power. Then how do we fight perception and fear? With witnesses, evidence, and embarrassment. If we can make Governor Perrot look cruel and foolish, he might back down to save face. They spent 2 days gathering support. Madame Montz convinced Sister Bourgeois to testify about Kateri's condition. Father Claude brought other Jesuits who'd worked with converted Mohawk and could speak to their loyalty. Claire prepared a detailed medical account of Kateri's treatment, emphasizing how close to death she'd been. The hearing was held in Ville-Marie's church, with Governor Perrot presiding alongside Father Perrot and several military officers. Kateri was brought in, still bound, her baby crying in her arms. She looked exhausted, frightened, but also defiant, refusing to bow her head or show weakness. Governor Perrot spoke first. "This woman is Mohawk, from a nation that has conducted numerous raids against French settlements. She was found in a mission station hiding her presence. The traitor Lebrun believes she was gathering intelligence. What does she say in her defense?" "She doesn't speak French well," Father Claude said. "I'll translate." Through Father Claude, Kateri told her story, pregnant with a dangerous complication, rejected by her own people's healers who couldn't help her, sent by her grandmother to the French mission as a last resort. She'd hidden because she feared exactly what had happened, being arrested simply for being Mohawk. "A convenient story," Lebrun sneered, "designed to earn sympathy." "It's the truth," Claire said, standing. "I examined this woman. She had a tumor in her womb that was killing her and her baby. I delivered the child 8 weeks premature through a difficult procedure that took hours. She's been recovering in my care. There's nothing remotely suspicious about any of this." "Except that she's Mohawk," Father Perrot interjected, "at a time when Mohawk raiders have been attacking our settlements. Her presence, regardless of her medical condition, represents a security risk." Then you're saying no Mohawk can ever receive medical care, Madame Mance challenged, that will let converted Christians die because of their tribal affiliation? How exactly does that advance our missionary work? It advances our survival, Governor Perot replied. Charity is a luxury we can't afford during wartime. Are we at war? Father Claude asked. I wasn't aware a formal declaration had been made. The question hung in the air. New France existed in a state of perpetual semi-conflict with various indigenous nations, but formal declarations of war were rare and politically significant. We're in a state of heightened alert, Governor Perot said carefully, which requires vigilance about potential threats. This woman is not a threat, Sister Bourgeois said, speaking for the first time. I've examined her myself. She's weak from childbirth, caring for a premature infant, and clearly needs continued medical care. Imprisoning her is not only cruel, but medically dangerous. If she or her baby dies in your custody, Governor, you'll have to explain to both the Church and the Mohawk Nation why you let a baptized Christian woman and her innocent child perish for political expediency. It was a masterful argument, invoking both Christian duty and political pragmatism. Killing a converted Mohawk woman could reignite the very conflict Governor Perot claimed to be preventing. Governor Perot looked uncomfortable. No one is suggesting we let her die, but releasing her sets a dangerous precedent. What precedent? That we treat sick people regardless of their origins? That we honor medical neutrality? That we're actually Christians rather than just calling ourselves Christians? Mademoiselle Renaud, you're hardly in a position to lecture about following rules, given your history. My history is saving lives. What's yours, Governor? Because right now it looks like imprisoning teenage mothers and their newborns to make political points. The assembled observers, townspeople who'd crowded into the church, murmured. Claire was taking a huge risk openly challenging the governor, but she was also voicing what many thought but wouldn't say. Governor Perot's face reddened. This is not... An intense commotion at the church entrance interrupted him. A group of Mohawk men entered, led by an older warrior whose bearing suggested high status. Behind them came Tekakwitha, Kateri's grandmother. Everyone froze. Armed Mohawk warriors in Ville-Marie's church was unprecedented and potentially catastrophic. The lead warrior spoke in Mohawk. Father Claude translated, his voice carefully neutral. I am Canada Saga, war chief of the Turtle Clan. I come under flag of truce to speak about my granddaughter who is imprisoned here. Your granddaughter? Governor Perot said, clearly thrown by this development. Tekakwitha spoke rapidly. Father Claude translated. Kateri is the daughter of Canada Saga's son, who died fighting the Oneida. She is blood kin to a war chief, not a common spy or prisoner. Taking her captive is an act of war. The temperature in the room dropped. If Kateri was related to a Mohawk war chief, her imprisonment became a diplomatic incident of the highest order. We weren't aware of her family connections, Governor Perot said carefully. She was found in suspicious circumstances. Kanadasaga spoke again, his tone sharp. Father Claude translated. She was dying. Her grandmother brought her to French healers because ours couldn't save her. The French healing woman, he gestured to Claire, saved both Kateri and her son. This is a debt of honor. Imprisoning them is dishonorable and provocative. Governor Perot was trapped. He couldn't release Kateri without appearing weak to his own people, but he couldn't keep her imprisoned without risking war with the Mohawk. Madame Mance stepped forward, offering a solution. Perhaps a compromise. Kateri is clearly not well enough to travel. Mademoiselle Renaud can confirm this. She and her baby remain here, but under medical supervision rather than imprisonment. Once she's fully recovered and the baby is strong enough, she returns to her people with proper escort. This honors both medical necessity and diplomatic courtesy. It was brilliant, giving everyone a way to save face. Kanadasaga considered, then nodded. Acceptable. But the healing woman must continue treating them. She saved my great-grandson's life. She has earned my trust. Agreed, Governor Perrot said quickly, clearly relieved to avoid war. Mademoiselle Renaud will provide continued care. Kateri will be housed appropriately, not imprisoned. After the Mohawk delegation left, Governor Perrot turned to Claire with barely contained fury. You've created an impossible situation. That girl is now a diplomatic hostage, and you're personally responsible for her welfare. If anything happens to her or her baby, it could mean war. Nothing will happen to them. I'll make sure of it. See that you do, because if this goes wrong, you'll bear the consequences. After he left, Father Claude approached Claire with a mixture of admiration and concern. That was extraordinarily dangerous. You've essentially made yourself guarantor of peace between New France and the Mohawk. I made myself responsible for my patients. That's what midwives do. Most midwives don't have their patients' welfare tied to colonial survival. Then most midwives have easier jobs than I do. Sister Bourgeois touched Claire's shoulder. You did well today. Your mother would be proud. The words unexpectedly moved Claire. She'd spent months feeling like she'd failed her mother's legacy, expelled from Ville-Marie, marginalized, constantly fighting for the right to practice medicine. But today, she'd saved lives and prevented war. Maybe that was enough. Kateri and her baby, named Tekakwitha after his great-great-grandmother, were moved to a small house near the Hôtel Dieu hospital. Claire visited daily, monitoring their recovery, adjusting treatments, ensuring both mother and child thrived. The baby grew stronger each day. Kateri's healing was slower. The tumor that had complicated her pregnancy remained, and Claire knew it would eventually kill her. But for now, Kateri was alive, functional, able to care for her son. They communicated through a mixture of French, Mohawk, and gestures. Gradually, a friendship formed. "Why did you help me?" Kateri asked, her French halting but understandable. "You are French. I am Mohawk. We are enemies." "We're not enemies. We're women. You were sick. I'm a healer. That's all that mattered." "Not all French think this way." "No, but all healers should." Kateri was quiet for a long moment. "Your medicine is strong. You saved us when our healers could not. My grandfather says this is great magic." "Not magic, just knowledge, techniques, herbs. Any healer could learn them." "But you learned them. You have the gift." Kateri touched Claire's hand. "Among our people, healers are sacred. They touch life and death. They walk between worlds. We honor them greatly. The French aren't so generous with honor for healers, especially women healers. That is foolish. Women birth life. We should know most about healing it." It was perhaps the most validation Claire had received since her mother's death, this young Mohawk woman understanding instinctively what French society struggled to accept. Over the following weeks, as Kateri recovered, she taught Claire about Mohawk healing practices, which plants they used for different ailments, how they understood the body's balance, their rituals around birth and death. "We see sickness as imbalance," Kateri explained, "between hot and cold, wet and dry, spirit and body. Healing means restoring balance, not just fighting disease." "That's different from French medicine. We see the body as a machine. Fix the broken part, fight the invading disease." "Both have wisdom. Maybe the best healing uses both." Claire found herself increasingly interested in this synthesis, combining French anatomical knowledge with indigenous understanding of holistic health. She began experimenting, using French surgical techniques alongside indigenous herbal medicine, achieving results neither tradition could accomplish alone. Word spread through both French and indigenous communities. The healing woman at Ville-Marie practiced powerful mixed medicine. Patients came from greater distances, Huron, Algonquin, even occasional Mohawk families willing to risk approaching French settlements for her care. Father Perrot complained constantly about the indigenous traffic through Ville-Marie, but Governor Perrot, having nearly caused a diplomatic disaster, now defended Claire's work as essential for maintaining peace. Every indigenous person she treats successfully is a potential ally, the governor argued. Her medicine is worth more diplomatically than any treaty. By late summer 1677, Kateri was well enough to travel home. The goodbye was emotional. Two women from different worlds who'd become friends through shared experience of healing and survival. You saved my life, and my son's life. That is a debt that cannot be repaid. But know this, you will always be welcome among the Mohawk. Always. You are sister to me, aunt to my son. That means something. What does it mean? It means you have family beyond your people. It means if you ever need refuge or help or allies, we are here. After Kateri left, Claire felt the weight of what she'd built. She wasn't just a midwife anymore. She was a bridge between peoples, her medical practice creating connections that diplomacy couldn't achieve. But bridge building was dangerous work, and Claire would soon learn exactly how dangerous. Because not everyone wanted bridges between French and indigenous peoples. Some wanted clear boundaries, pure separation, conflict that made choosing sides simple. And those people would soon make their opposition to Claire's work very clear. The trouble began in October 1677 when Claire delivered twins to a Frenchwoman named Mathilde Gagnon. The birth was difficult, one baby breech, the other tangled in the cord. Claire worked for hours, finally delivering both babies alive through a combination of technique, stamina, and what felt like pure luck. Mathilde recovered well. The babies thrived. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it became an accusation. A week after the delivery, Father Perrot summoned Claire to the church. Mademoiselle Renaud, I've received a disturbing report. Mathilde Gagnon's husband claims you used indigenous witchcraft during the delivery of his children. Claire's blood went cold. Witchcraft? I used standard medical techniques. He says you chanted in a savage language, used strange herbs, performed rituals he didn't recognize. He's concerned you've cursed his children. I did none of those things. I used herbs I learned from Mohawk healers, yes, the same herbs that saved Kateri's life. I may have spoken some Mohawk words while working, simply because that's the language those techniques came from, but there was no witchcraft, no curses, no rituals beyond standard medical practice. Standard French medical practice or savage practices you've adopted. Medicine that works, medicine that saved 3 lives, a mother and 2 babies who would have died otherwise. Father Perrot leaned forward, his expression severe. This is exactly what I feared. You've spent too much time with indigenous peoples. You've adopted their ways, their language, their practices. You're becoming more savage than French. I'm becoming a better healer by learning from multiple traditions. You're contaminating French medicine with heathen practices, and now you're accused of witchcraft. Do you understand how serious this is? Claire did understand. Witchcraft accusations could lead to trial, imprisonment, even execution. Women had been burned for less than what she was being accused of. Who else has made this accusation besides Gagnon? Father Perrot hesitated. Several people have expressed concern about your methods, the way you mix French and savage medicines, the way you speak their languages, the way you seem more comfortable with indigenous peoples than your own kind. My own kind includes anyone who needs healing. That's what being a midwife means. That's what being a witch sounds like. Claiming powers beyond normal human ken, speaking strange languages, using mysterious herbs. Mademoiselle Renaud, you're on very dangerous ground. Madame Mance intervened, having heard about the summons. Father Perot, are you seriously suggesting that learning indigenous languages and herbal medicine constitutes witchcraft? By that standard, every Jesuit missionary who learns native languages is a warlock. That's different. Missionaries learn languages to spread God's word, not to practice medicine outside church supervision. Claire practices medicine to save lives, which is also God's work, unless you're prepared to argue that God prefers dead mothers and children to living ones saved through indigenous knowledge. I'm arguing that there are proper ways to practice medicine and dangerous ways that invite demonic influence. Demonic influence? Claire's voice rose despite her attempt to stay calm. I'm using plants that grow in God's creation, applied with techniques that work. If that's demonic, then all of medicine is demonic. Sister Bourgeois entered, having also learned of the confrontation. What's happening here? Madame Renaud is being accused of witchcraft, Madame Mance said flatly. Sister Bourgeois' eyes flashed with rare anger. By whom? Based on what evidence? Based on her use of indigenous practices, which have saved dozens of lives since she arrived in New France. Father Perot, I've watched Claire work. I've seen her techniques. There's nothing supernatural about them, just skill, knowledge, and dedication. Accusing her of witchcraft because she's competent is not only unjust, it's dangerous stupidity. Sister Bourgeois? Don't Sister Bourgeois me. I've been in New France for 23 years. I've seen enough actual evil to know what it looks like. Claire Renaud is not evil. She's a gifted healer who makes you uncomfortable because she doesn't fit your narrow definitions of proper feminine behavior. That's your problem, not hers. The confrontation hung in tension. Father Perot clearly wanted to push the witchcraft accusation, but Sister Bourgeois and Madame Mance, two of New France's most respected women, stood firmly against him. Finally, he said, I'll drop the formal witchcraft charge, but Mademoiselle Renaud, you're warned. Moderate your practices. Stop using indigenous languages during treatments. Stop mixing savage medicines with French techniques so obviously. Make yourself less suspicious. Or what? Or accusations will return, and next time I may not be able to stop them. After he left, Claire sank onto a bench, shaking from reaction. That was close, Madame Mance said quietly. Too close. I can't stop using techniques that work just because they make people uncomfortable. You may have to, or at least hide them better. Claire, I admire your principles, but dead martyrs save no lives. Living healers, even compromised ones, do. Sister Bourgeois put a hand on Claire's shoulder. She's right. You're walking a razor's edge. One misstep and you'll fall. Not just ending your career, but possibly your life. Be smarter about this. Claire understood what they were saying, but she also understood that being smarter meant concealing knowledge, pretending ignorance, practicing inferior medicine to avoid offense. Her mother had navigated similar pressures in France, but her mother had died before teaching Claire all the political skills needed for survival. Now Claire had to learn them on her own, or face consequences far worse than professional embarrassment. She'd crossed an ocean to practice her calling freely. Instead, she'd found that even in the wilderness, the same forces that had constrained women healers in France operated here. Perhaps more powerfully, because New France was smaller, more controlled, more desperate for conformity in the face of constant external threats. But Claire had never been good at conformity, and she was about to learn exactly what defying conformity cost. Through winter 1677-1678, Claire walked the razor's edge Sister Bourgeois had described. She continued practicing medicine, but moderated her visible use of indigenous techniques. She still used Mohawk herbal remedies, but didn't speak the names aloud. She still applied holistic healing principles, but framed them in French medical terminology. It was exhausting. constantly self-censoring, hiding effective medicine, pretending ignorance to avoid suspicion. And it wasn't enough. In February, a crisis arose that would force Claire to choose between church authority and her medical oath, finally and irrevocably. A young woman named Elizabeth Dubois went into obstructed labor. The baby was positioned wrong, too large, unable to pass through the birth canal. After 18 hours of labor, Elizabeth was exhausted, delirious with pain, and dying. The French medical approach was clear. If the baby couldn't be delivered naturally, it would die inside the mother. Sometimes the mother could be saved by removing the dead baby piece by piece, a horrific procedure called embryotomy. More often, both mother and child died. But Claire had learned another technique from Kateri, a Mohawk method of creating strategic incisions to widen the birth canal temporarily, allowing difficult babies to be delivered alive. It was risky, painful, but it sometimes saved both lives when French medicine saved neither. Father Perrault was present. Protocol required a priest during potentially fatal births to administer last rites if needed. "The baby can't be delivered naturally," Claire told him. "If we do nothing, both will die within hours. Then we'll do the French procedure, remove the dead baby, try to save the mother. Or I can try the Mohawk technique, cut carefully, deliver the baby alive, save both lives possibly." Savage medicine? Absolutely not. It works. I don't care if it works. We are French, Catholic, civilized. We don't use heathen techniques on Christian women. You'll do the French procedure or nothing. The French procedure means definitely killing the baby and probably killing the mother. The Mohawk technique might save both, or might kill both through your incompetence and demonic practices. Elizabeth groaned in agony. Her husband, Jean Dubois, looked between them desperately. "Can you save them?" he asked Claire. "Both of them?" "I can try, but I need to use a technique the Father forbids." "If it saves my wife and child, use it." "Against church orders?" Father Perrault demanded. "You'd let her use savage witchcraft on your wife?" "I'd let her do whatever saves them." Claire looked at Elizabeth, dying, suffering, along with her unborn child. She looked at Father Perrault, rigid with doctrine, unwilling to bend even as lives hung in the balance. And she made her choice. "I'm going to try to save them," she said. "Father, you can support this or oppose it, but I'm not letting them die because of your pride. If you do this, you're finished. I'll have you expelled not just from Ville-Marie, but from all New France. I'll report you to the bishop, to the intendant, to the king himself if necessary. You'll never practice medicine again. Then I'll face those consequences after I save these lives." She turned her back on him and began working. The procedure was exactly as difficult as Claire expected. She made careful incisions, widening the birth canal just enough. Elizabeth screamed despite the herbs Claire had given for pain. Blood flowed heavily. Claire packed it with moss and pressure. Finally, the baby emerged, a large boy, blue but breathing after Claire cleared his airway. Elizabeth hemorrhaged severely, but Claire controlled it with herbs and pressure. Both lived. Exhausted, Claire looked up to find Father Perrault's face twisted with fury. "You've condemned yourself," he said. "You chose savage medicine over church authority. That's heresy, defiance, and possibly witchcraft. You'll face consequences." "I saved 2 lives. If that's heresy, I'll answer for it gladly." Jean Dubois, holding his newborn son, looked at Father Perrault with cold anger. "She saved my wife and child when you would have let them die. Whatever you call that, heresy, witchcraft, defiance, I call it godly, and I'll testify to that if you try to prosecute her." Other women who'd been supporting during the birth murmured agreement. They'd witnessed the miracle of both mother and child surviving what should have been a double death. Father Perot left, promising action. Over the next week, he built his case. Claire had defied direct orders. She'd used unauthorized techniques. She'd prioritized indigenous medicine over French. She'd rejected church authority in favor of her own judgment. It was, by any colonial standard, grounds for expulsion and possibly prosecution. But something unexpected happened. The women of Ville-Marie, French and indigenous both, organized in Claire's defense. They gathered testimonies of lives saved, children delivered, mothers who'd survived because of Claire's skill. They documented every successful outcome, every life that would have been lost without her. Sister Bourgeois and Madame Montz presented this evidence to the church council, along with a simple argument. You can expel Claire Renaud and make an example of her defiance, but you'll also be expelling the only trained midwife in Ville-Marie, condemning future mothers and children to death for lack of care. Is that the example you want to set? That doctrine matters more than lives? The council deliberated for 3 days. Finally, they reached a compromise, unsatisfying to everyone, but pragmatic. Claire could continue practicing medicine, but she was officially censured for defiance, placed under permanent supervision, and warned that any future violation of church authority would result in immediate expulsion. She could save lives, but only on their terms, following their rules, subordinating her medical judgment to their doctrinal concerns. It was perhaps the best outcome she could have hoped for under the circumstances, but it also meant surrendering some of the medical freedom she'd fought so hard to protect. That night, Sister Bourgeois found Claire in the chapel, praying, or perhaps just sitting in silence. "You did the right thing," Sister Bourgeois said, sitting beside her. "Did I? I saved 2 lives but compromised my principles. I'm now practicing medicine under constant supervision, always second-guessing myself, wondering if saving lives is worth the political cost." It is worth it. Your mother knew that. She navigated church restrictions for 40 years because the alternative, not practicing at all, was unacceptable. You'll learn the same navigation. What if I'm not as good at it as she was? You're already better than you think. You saved Elizabeth and her baby despite every obstacle. That's not failure, that's triumph. Claire wanted to believe her, but she felt the weight of compromise, the cost of survival in a system designed to control women who knew too much. She'd crossed an ocean seeking freedom to practice her calling. Instead, she'd learned that freedom was always conditional, always negotiated, always purchased with pieces of herself. But she'd also learned something her mother had known, that even constrained, even compromised, healing work mattered. Saving lives one difficult choice at a time was still worth doing, even when the doing cost everything. 5 years passed. Claire remained in Ville-Marie, practicing medicine under the restrictions imposed by the church council. She saved lives, delivered babies, treated illnesses, and navigated the complex politics of colonial healthcare. It wasn't the career she'd imagined, but it was more than she'd had in France. By 1683, she was 32 years old, older than most filles du roi, still unmarried, still focused entirely on her medical work. The settlement had become accustomed to her, even come to value her despite ongoing discomfort with her methods. In April of that year, a delegation of Mohawk arrived seeking the healing woman. They brought with them Kateri's grandmother, Tekakwitha, who was seriously ill. "She's dying," Kanadasaga said through translation. "Our healers can't help her. She asked for you specifically." Father Perot left, promising action. "She's dying," Kanadasaga said through translation. "Our healers can't help her. She asked for you specifically." Father Perot, now older and slightly more pragmatic after years of dealing with Claire, gave grudging permission. "Treat her, but here, in the hospital, under supervision." Claire examined Tekakwitha and recognized a massive tumor in her abdomen, inoperable, terminal. She could ease pain, but not cure. I can make her comfortable, Claire told the family, but I can't save her. I'm sorry. Kanatasaga nodded gravely. She knows, but she wanted to see you one more time, to thank you. Through her pain, Tekakwitha spoke. Claire's Mohawk had improved over the years, enough to understand. You saved my granddaughter and great-grandson. You gave our family life when it should have ended. You are a true healer. You see people, not enemies. That is rare. That is precious. Thank you, Claire said, her throat tight. Your granddaughter taught me as much as I taught her. Mohawk healing wisdom combined with French technique, together they're more powerful than either alone. Yes, together we are stronger. The French forget this. They think their way is the only way, but you remember. Tekakwitha gripped Claire's hand. Promise me you'll keep remembering, keep mixing the medicines, keep seeing people first. I promise. Tekakwitha died peacefully 3 days later with Claire administering herbs for pain and her family surrounding her. The Mohawk delegation thanked Claire formally, presented her with gifts, including a beautifully beaded bag for her medical instruments, and left in peace. Father Perot observed this with visible discomfort. You've become too important to them, too valuable. That creates complications. Complications like peace, like mutual respect, like building bridges between peoples? Complications like divided loyalty. You're French, Mademoiselle Renaud. You're supposed to serve French interests first. I'm a healer, Father. I serve life first, French, Mohawk, or otherwise. It was an old argument, never fully resolved. But by 1683, Claire had learned to accept the perpetual tension. She would never have the complete freedom her mother had enjoyed. She would always practice under scrutiny, always navigate church politics, always balance saving lives against maintaining approval. But she was still practicing, still saving lives, still honoring the oath she'd sworn to her dying mother. That same year, Sister Bourgeois approached Claire with a proposal. I'm establishing a formal school for girls, teaching reading, writing, practical skills. I want to include basic medical training. Would you be willing to teach? Teach girls medicine? The church would never approve. The church might if we frame it correctly, not as training midwives, but as teaching girls to care for their family's health. Basic herb knowledge, wound care, recognizing serious illness, practical skills every woman should have. It was brilliant, a way to pass on medical knowledge while avoiding the stigma of formal medical training for women. I'll do it, Claire said immediately. Over the following years, she taught dozens of girls basic health care. Most would never become midwives, but they'd carry medical knowledge into their households, raising the general level of health competence across the colony. A few girls showed real aptitude, future healers who might build on what Claire had started, continuing the synthesis of French and indigenous medicine she'd pioneered. In 1688, Claire finally married, not for love or social pressure, but for practical protection. Henri de Rocher was a widower, a carpenter who needed a wife to manage his household. He was kind, respected Claire's work, and asked nothing of her except companionship and household management. I'll never be a traditional wife, Claire warned him. I don't need traditional, I need capable. You're the most capable woman I know. It was perhaps the least romantic proposal ever, but it worked for both of them. Claire gained legal protection that came with marriage, plus a partner who supported her medical practice. Henri gained household management and the prestige of being married to Ville-Marie's celebrated midwife. They were content, which was more than many marriages achieved. In 1695, Claire delivered her 1,000th baby, a milestone marked with quiet celebration among the women of Ville-Marie. Her success rate was extraordinary. More than 90% of mothers and babies survived her care, far better than typical colonial or French rates. How do you do it? save so many?" a young woman asked. "I use everything I know, French techniques, indigenous medicines, prayer when appropriate, and stubborn refusal to accept death when life is possible. And I never stop learning. Every difficult case teaches me something new." By 1700, Claire was 49 years old. Her hands, once smooth and young, were now weathered and scarred from decades of medical work. Her hair had gone gray. Her body ached from years of being called out at odd hours, working through exhaustion, carrying heavy medical bags. But she was still practicing, still saving lives, still teaching younger women her techniques. And most importantly, she was doing it her way, having won through sheer competence and stubbornness the right to practice medicine that blended French and indigenous wisdom. In her small cabin, she kept a journal, recording her cases, her techniques, her reflections on decades of medical practice. She wrote, "My mother taught me that healing is sacred work, that life is precious regardless of who lives it, that competent women must navigate systems designed to control them, must be twice as skilled to earn half the respect, must fight constantly for the right to use their gifts. I've spent 30 years fighting that fight, fighting church restrictions, colonial politics, prejudice against both women healers and indigenous knowledge. It's been exhausting, frustrating, often maddening. But I've also saved more than 1,000 lives. I've delivered babies who've grown into adults, contributed to building this colony. I've treated Mohawk, Algonquin, Huron, and French patients with equal care. I've built bridges between peoples through the universal language of healing. If my mother could see me now, I hope she'd be proud. Not because I became famous or powerful, I'm neither, but because I kept the oath. I saved lives regardless of station or circumstance. I refused to let doctrine, fear, or politics stop me from doing what was right. That's what being a midwife means. Not just delivering babies, but delivering hope, showing that even in this harsh colony, even under constant constraint, competent women can make real differences. The work isn't finished. It never will be, but I've done my part. And whoever continues this work after me, I hope they remember, medicine that works is always more important than medicine that's comfortable. Lives saved matter more than rules followed. That's my mother's legacy, and now it's mine to pass forward." Claire Renaud de Rocher died in 1712 at age 61, having practiced midwifery for over 40 years. By colonial standards, she lived to a good age, doing work she loved, leaving a legacy of thousands of lives saved. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, French settlers, indigenous families, children she'd delivered who were now adults, women she'd trained who'd become healers themselves. Father Perrault, elderly now and softened by years, gave the eulogy. Claire Renaud was not an easy woman. She defied authority, questioned doctrine, and practiced medicine in ways that made church officials deeply uncomfortable, including me. Soft laughter from the assembled crowd. But she also saved more lives than any healer in New France's history. She treated French and indigenous peoples with equal skill and compassion. She built bridges through her medicine that diplomacy couldn't achieve. And she taught a generation of women that healing knowledge is precious, powerful, and worth fighting for. He paused, his voice becoming reflective. I've spent years trying to control her, to make her practice conform to proper procedures. I was wrong. Not because church authority doesn't matter, it does, but because some gifts are too important to constrain. Some callings transcend our human rules. Claire had such a calling, and we're blessed that she honored it despite every obstacle we placed in her path. They buried her in Ville-Marie's cemetery, her grave marked with a simple stone. Claire Renaud de Rocher, 1651 to 1712. Midwife, healer, bridge builder. She saved lives. It was the epitaph she would have chosen, simple, honest, focused on the work rather than herself. Years later, her journal was discovered and copied, becoming a medical text used to train midwives across New France. Her synthesis of French and indigenous healing techniques became standard practice, though few remembered she'd pioneered it. But the women who'd worked with her remembered. The families whose children she'd saved remembered. The indigenous healers who'd taught her and learned from her remembered. Claire Renaud had crossed an ocean seeking freedom to practice her calling. She'd found instead a lifetime of constraint, compromise, and constant struggle. But she'd also found something more valuable: proof that even in systems designed to control women's knowledge, competent women could still save lives, could still make differences, could still honor their calling. That was freedom of a different kind. Not freedom from struggle, but freedom to struggle meaningfully, to fight for something worth fighting for, to make work matter despite endless obstacles. And in that struggle, Claire had become exactly what her mother had trained her to be: a healer who saw people first, who saved lives regardless of politics, who honored her calling above all else. The midwife of Ville-Marie, who'd helped deliver a colony into being, one difficult birth at a time.